Some activists in Jamaica Plain have been trying to restore a trolley service that was cut short in 1985. That's when the E-line was terminated at its current last stop, Heath Street, instead of going all the way to the Arborway. But with new housing planned along South Huntington Avenue, there's a new push for extending the line as far as Hyde Square. Our guest is one of the leaders in that campaign. We'd like to welcome a board member of the Arborway Committee for Public Transit, Franklyn Salimbene. Thank you very much for being with us, Franklyn.
Thank you, Chris.
A lot of things maybe in some people's minds have been settled about ending the trolleys beyond Heath Street, but there have been some important changes in that area along South Huntington Avenue between Heath Street and Perkins Street, even almost as far as Center Street.
Right. Well, it's actually good to set the context for what we're proposing, and the context is that the BRA just last year designated South Huntington Avenue as a development zone, development corridor from Huntington Avenue all the way up to Perkins Street. And so we've already begun to see development ongoing on the street. There are three developments that are either underway or are proposed, which will increase the residential population on the street by well over 1,000 people. And looking ahead at allowing those people to have access not only to town, but coming back out of town, we're thinking that an improvement in the transit service along the avenue is really critical as part of the plan.
Well, another thing that's going on is in Hyde Square. This is a commercial center for what was for a long time in my lifetime the Latino community in Jamaica Plain. There's an attempt to make it both a commercial and cultural center. And how does the trolley line figure with that? Well,
first of all, you're right with regard to Hyde Square. It's being captioned as the Latin Quarter, and the extension of the Green Line to Hyde Square will put the square on the map. It will provide for easier access to the square from all parts of Greater Boston, and it will obviously improve foot traffic on the street for merchants and make it easy for residents to get to their home. And the idea again of as we think about development in the city or in neighborhoods, I think it's really critically important to be proactive to get the transit situation right. I'm sure you're aware of it in Cambridge, for example, at Kendall Square. The City Council is contemplating a large project, significant increase in the number of people, and the question is, wait a minute, what are we going to do about transit? The red line, is it adequate? So I think this is part of that same dynamic of building your transit in proportion to the extent of development in a particular neighborhood.
Well, it's clear one advantage of a trolley ride as far as Hyde Square is that you can go all the way to Park Street. You don't have to get off at Copley and maybe pay again, but on the other hand, people say, look, you've got the Orange Line at Jackson Square, not to mention Stony Brook, you've got the number 39 bus, so would this really be much of a priority for a governor who's got to struggle to fix the T?
Well, I hope it would for a couple of reasons. One is, of course, that Jamaica Plain, and this particular section of Jamaica Plain has been designated, it was actually designated by the T as an environmental justice neighborhood. And so in looking at the expenditure of funds for transit, the Environmental Justice Initiative requires that a fair amount of funding that goes into transit be focused on those neighborhoods which are environmental justice neighborhoods, low-income neighborhoods, neighborhoods where perhaps the native language is not, the first language is not English. And so I think the governor needs to at least, and I'm sure he does, recognize the importance of environmental justice. With regard to the Orange Line, Stony Brook is actually quite a distance away from the Hyde Square area. Jackson Square is closer, but Jackson Square on the Orange Line doesn't serve Hyde Square the way we're proposing that the Green Line would serve Hyde Square.
Talk about some of these possible configurations. I know you've got four of them that are out there on the table for discussion. Some of them involve looping around the Hyde Square Circle, another one going down Barbara Street, and you got one very simple that would be just basically coming up South Huntington Avenue as far as Center and stub ending. Is that the term for it?
I think so, right. Well, actually, that particular proposal, the stub end, at the top of South Huntington Avenue, right at Center Street. In talking with Fred Salvucci, Fred thought that that probably would be the simplest to implement. But when we had our community meeting last week, the individuals who gathered at the meeting decided, or they thought by a majority, that the more attractive proposal would to bring the Green Line into the square and then loop it around Barbara Street and bring it back out again onto South Huntington Avenue. And in looking at that particular option, depending upon how the city wants to deal with parking on Perkins Street, you can actually increase parking by a space, or you might end up losing 3 spaces.
And by the way, this is not strictly about a trolley line. You're thinking of multimodal transportation.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Chris. What we're looking at, what we're proposing, I wish I could say what we were looking at doing and we were actually going to do it, but what we're proposing is to create a complete street along South Huntington Avenue, and that would mean that the street from, at least from Heath Street up to Perkins or to Center Street, would be designed with a cycle track as opposed to cycle lane on either side of the street. If you could think of it, you'd have your sidewalks, then you'd have the cycle lanes next to the sidewalks, then you'd have your parking lane outside the bicycle tracks, and then of course you'd have your travel lanes, and they could be, the street would easily accommodate 11 and 12-foot wide traffic lanes, along with 8-foot parking lanes and 6-foot cycle tracks.
You know, I can see here why there would be benefits for development of the Latin Quarter, but when I think of extending or at least reinstating a trolley line, the more recent precedent here is Somerville. A lot of concern there about gentrification. Could that be a problem here, over and above what's happened already?
Yes, because I think whenever planners look at improving the quality of life in a particular neighborhood, they will always think of amenities like infrastructure. And then, of course, the question becomes, well, if we improve the neighborhood, it'll become attractive. And the other side of that coin is, it will be attractive. It'll be attractive to people who live there. And the alternative is to do nothing with infrastructure in neighborhoods. And that really disserves the people who live in them currently. So I think that it's an important point to raise, and I think you're aware of the fact, being a Jamaica Plain resident yourself.
Mission Hill.
Mission Hill, I'm sorry. Well, that's close enough. We're all friends here.
Yeah. But there's a benefit, because maybe you can get more development, more affordability built into that if you have more transportation
that's the point,
capacity.
and thank you for picking up on my hesitation. The neighborhood has always been very careful about requiring developers to come in and include ample affordable units in these new construction projects. And we've been working very hard with the Jamaica Pond Association and others to make sure that the development that is already happening at 161 South Huntington, at 105A South Huntington, and which will begin at 201 South Huntington, will all have at least a fair amount of affordable housing.
We should mention, Franklyn, also you've got some social media people can check out.
Yeah, thank you. The Arborway Committee for Public Transit, we have a website, www.arborway.org, and we're also on Twitter and Facebook.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Chris.
Franklyn Salimbene, and we'll have more news in just a moment.